They found her huddled in the shadows of a mountain cave, her once vibrant green dress now torn and stained with mud and dried blood. For 19 days, she had survived on nothing but rainwater collected in hollowed stones and a few wild berries that grew near the cave's entrance. Her hands were raw from climbing over jagged rocks, her eyes haunted by horrors no human should witness. The Cherokee scout who discovered her said later that it wasn't tracks or signs that led him to her hiding place. It was the sound of muffled weeping carried on the dawn breeze, a sound so filled with sorrow it seemed to come from the mountain itself. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning fog clung to the Blackstone Mountains like a shroud, wrapping the towering pines in ghostly white as Elijah Running Fox moved silently through the underbrush. The 27-year-old Cherokee scout had been tracking game for his people when he noticed something unusual. A series of broken branches too high for deer, too deliberate for bear. Someone unfamiliar with the mountains had passed this way, someone desperate enough to risk the treacherous terrain. Elijah paused, crouching to examine a partial footprint in the damp earth. Small, definitely human, a woman's boot from the size and depth. The rain had washed away most signs, but what remained told him enough. Whoever left these tracks was injured, favoring their right side, moving with increasing difficulty up the mountain's eastern face. As dawn broke fully over the ridge, Elijah stood perfectly still, listening beyond the natural sounds of the forest. The birds had resumed their morning songs, a good sign that no immediate danger lurked nearby. But then, carried on the wind, came something that made his breath catch, a sound so faint it might have been mistaken for the mountain stream's whisper or the sigh of wind through pine needles. A human sound, someone weeping. Elijah followed. The sound to a narrow fissure in the mountainside, easily overlooked if you didn't know exactly where to look. The opening barely allowed passage for a single person, and inside, the cave extended deep into darkness. Many of his people avoided this particular cave, believing it housed troubled spirits, but the weeping continued, unmistakably human, unmistakably broken. "Hello," he called softly in English, his voice echoing against the stone walls. "I mean, no harm." The weeping stopped abruptly, replaced by terrified silence. Elijah stepped just inside the entrance, letting his eyes adjust to the dimness. At first, he saw nothing but shadows and stone. Then a slight movement caught his attention, a darker shape pressed against the far wall, trying to become one with the rock itself. "I can help you," he said, remaining where he stood to avoid frightening whoever hid in the darkness. "You're safe now," a voice finally answered, so hoarse from disuse it barely sounded human. "No one is safe." Elijah moved forward slowly, careful to make his movements deliberate and non-threatening. As he drew closer, the huddled shape resolved into a young woman, perhaps 25 years old, with tangled auburn hair that hadn't seen a brush in weeks. Her green dress, once fine by the look of the fabric, was now a tattered remnant, torn at the hem and sleeve. Dried blood stained the collar, though whether it was hers or someone else's, Elijah couldn't immediately tell. Her eyes, wide with fear and exhaustion, followed his every move. They were an unusual shade of amber, striking even in the cave's dim light, but it was the emptiness behind them that troubled Elijah most, the look of someone who had witnessed things that had stripped away fundamental trust in the world. "My name is Elijah Running Fox," he said, crouching several feet away from her. "I'm a scout for the Eastern Cherokee settlement in the valley. I can take you somewhere safe, get you food and clean water." The woman didn't respond immediately. Her gaze darted past him to the cave entrance, as if calculating whether she could reach it before he could stop her. "There's no need to run," Elijah said gently. "Whatever happened, whoever you're hiding from, they aren't here now." Her cracked lips parted. "They killed everyone," she whispered. "Everyone except me." Elijah nodded slowly, careful not to show the alarm her words triggered. "What's your name?" The question seemed to confuse her, as if she'd been alone so long she'd forgotten the basic rituals of human interaction. "Sarah?" she finally said. "Sarah Thornton." Then, after a pause, she corrected herself. "No, Sarah Mitchell. I was married." Was. The word hung in the air between them. "Sarah," Elijah repeated, "you need medicine, food. I have a horse nearby. The settlement is less than half a day's ride from here. Our healer can tend to your injuries." Sarah's hand moved unconsciously to her side, where Elijah now noticed a crude bandage fashioned from torn fabric. "They'll find me if I leave the mountain," she said, her voice carrying the flat certainty of someone stating an irrefutable fact. "Who will find you, Sarah?" Her eyes met his, suddenly sharp with terror and remnants of rage. "Men in black coats. They said they were government surveyors, but they lied. They came at night, they had guns, so many guns." Elijah had heard rumors of trouble with wagon trains passing through the territory, robberies, occasional skirmishes with hostile groups. But the fear in Sarah's eyes spoke of something more organized, more deliberate. "How long have you been?" "Hiding here?" he asked. Sarah's gaze turned inward, counting days that had blurred together. "The moon was half when it happened. Now it's full again. Nearly 3 weeks then. Surviving alone in the unforgiving mountains, with what appeared to be an untreated wound. That she was alive at all spoke to extraordinary resilience." "You're safe now," Elijah repeated, though he understood her fear better than she knew. The world beyond these mountains wasn't kind to either of them. Her with her wild eyes and traumatic story, him with his Cherokee blood in territories increasingly hostile to his people. "I buried what I could," Sarah continued, the words spilling out now as if a dam had broken. "My husband Andrew, our friends, the children." Her voice caught. "Some were too... I couldn't..." She shook her head, unable to complete the thought. "You did what you could," Elijah said quietly. It was an absolution she clearly needed, though he knew from experience that such wounds to the spirit healed slowly, if ever. Sarah's eyes filled with tears that carved clean paths through the dirt on her face. "They were looking for something. They kept asking where it was hidden. But we didn't have anything worth taking, just some silver coins, family heirlooms. We were farmers heading to Oregon Territory." Her hands trembled as she reached into the folds of her tattered dress and withdrew a small leather pouch. "This was all I could save, Andrew's watch, our marriage certificate, and this." She extracted a folded paper, creased from repeated handling. "A map. I found it in our wagon master's jacket when I was..." She swallowed hard. "When I was burying him." Elijah didn't reach for the paper. Something in Sarah's expression told him this wasn't merely a sentimental keepsake. "What kind of map?" "I don't know exactly," she admitted, "but they tore apart every wagon looking for it. They kept asking about the route and the passage. The wagon master, Mr. Holloway, he was a former military man. He kept to himself, mostly, but he was kind. He never mentioned any special map." Elijah considered this information carefully. Maps were valuable in this territory, particularly those showing safe passages through the mountains or routes avoiding tribal lands that might lead to conflict. But a map valuable enough to massacre an entire wagon train, that suggested something more significant. "May I see it?" he asked. Sarah hesitated, then extended her hand. The paper was fragile, threatening to tear along its well-worn creases. Elijah unfolded it carefully, revealing not a traditional route map as he'd expected, but something far stranger, a detailed drawing of mountain formations with symbols and notations in a code he didn't recognize. In one corner, faded but legible, were the words "Windfall Pass" and what appeared to be a military seal. "Have you shown this to anyone else?" he asked, keeping his voice neutral. Sarah shook her head. "There hasn't been anyone else, just shadows and ghosts." Elijah refolded the map and returned it to her. "We should get you to safety, Sarah. Then we can figure out what this means and why those men wanted it badly enough to—" He stopped, seeing the flash of pain cross her face. "We'll find answers," he amended. Sarah clutched the leather pouch to her chest. "I can't leave yet," she whispered. "Not until I know they won't find me again." "The settlement is well hidden," Elijah assured her, "and our chief, Grey Wolf, is respected by both the Cherokee Nation and the territorial authorities. You'll be protected there while you heal." Something shifted in Sarah's expression. Not quite trust, but perhaps the first fragile seed of it. "Will you help me find out why they did this?" she asked. "Why my husband died? Why children were—" Her voice broke again. Elijah nodded solemnly. "I promise." He extended his hand, palm up, an offer, not a demand. For several heartbeats, Sarah simply stared at it, as if she'd forgotten the simple human gesture of taking another's hand. Then, with visible effort, she reached out, her fingers cold and trembling as they touched his. In that moment, as sunlight began to filter through the narrow cave entrance, illuminating dust motes that danced like spirits in the beam, two strangers formed an unspoken pact, one seeking justice for unimaginable loss, the other driven by a heritage that understood all too well the consequences when powerful men decided others' lives were expendable. "Can you walk?" Elijah asked gently. Sarah nodded and attempted to stand, her legs buckling immediately. 19 days of minimal food and water, coupled with her injuries, had taken their toll. Without hesitation, Elijah moved to support her. One arm around her waist, careful of the wound at her side. "Lean on me," he said simply. And she did, this woman who had survived alone when all others had fallen, who had climbed a mountain with an untreated wound to hide from men who thought nothing of slaughtering innocents for a piece of paper. She leaned on him, allowing herself this small surrender after weeks of desperate solitude. Together, they emerged from the mountain cave into the morning light, the first step of a journey neither could have anticipated when dawn broke across the Blackstone Mountains that day. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. The settlement of White Pine Haven nestled in a protected valley that few outsiders knew existed. Surrounded by dense forest and sheltered by the Blackstone Mountains, it had become a place of coexistence between the eastern Cherokee, who had avoided forced relocation, and a small number of white settlers who had formed respectful bonds with them over the decades. Here, traditional Cherokee dwellings stood alongside modest log cabins. Gardens thrived with both native plants and European vegetables. It was neither fully Cherokee nor white in character. Instead, it had evolved into something unique, a rare pocket of harmony in a territory increasingly divided by prejudice and violence. When Elijah brought Sarah into the settlement, Chief Grey Wolf, a man whose English name, William Grey, was scarcely used anymore, met them at the edge of the village. His weathered face, etched with 65 years of wisdom and hardship, showed neither suspicion nor immediate welcome, only careful assessment. "She needs medicine woman's help," Elijah explained in Cherokee, then switched to English. "This is Sarah Mitchell. She survived an attack on her wagon train nearly 3 weeks ago." The chief nodded once. "Bring her to the healing lodge." As they passed through the settlement, curious eyes followed them. Children peeked from behind doorways, while adults paused in their work, expressions ranging from concern to wariness. Sarah, barely conscious after the journey down the mountain, was aware enough to notice the mixed community. "I didn't know places like this existed," she murmured. her voice weak. "Most don't," Elijah replied. "That's how we've survived." The healing lodge sat at the far end of the settlement, a circular structure built half into the hillside. Inside, the air was fragrant, with herbs and wood smoke from a small central fire. An elderly woman with silver hair, braided in a traditional style, looked up from grinding plants with a stone mortar and pestle. "Hannah!" Elijah addressed her respectfully, using her English name rather than her Cherokee one in Sarah's presence. "This woman needs your help." Hannah set aside her work, gesturing to a pallet of clean furs near the fire. "Lay her down, then go. Men have no place in the healing lodge when a woman is being tended." After ensuring Sarah was settled, Elijah reluctantly withdrew, promising to return soon. Outside, Chief Grey Wolf waited, his expression grave. "3 wagons were found burned at Eagle River Crossing 4 days ago," he said, without preamble. "The territorial marshal is blaming Comanche raiders, but Comanche don't cross this far east anymore." Elijah's jaw tightened. "It wasn't Comanche. Sarah says men in black coats claiming to be government surveyors attacked her wagon train. They were searching for something specific, a map she now carries." The chief's eyes narrowed. "What kind of map?" "Something military with coded markings. It shows a place called Windfall Pass." Recognition flashed across Grey Wolf's face. "That name has not been spoken aloud in many years." He glanced toward the healing lodge. "The woman, can she be trusted?" "She survived alone in the mountains for 19 days, hiding from the men who murdered her husband and friends," Elijah replied. "Whatever she's carrying, she paid for it in blood and tears." Grey Wolf nodded solemnly. "When she is strong enough to speak, bring her to my lodge. If what I suspect is true, her presence here puts us all in grave danger." Inside the healing lodge, Hannah worked methodically, cleaning Sarah's wounds with herbal infusions and applying poultices to reduce infection. The largest injury, a deep gash along her right side, had begun to heal but poorly, the edges inflamed and angry. "You tended this yourself?" Hannah asked, her English accented but clear. Sarah nodded weakly. "Used my petticoat, boiled water when I could make a small fire." Hannah made a sound of grudging approval. "Smart woman, saved your life." She applied a pungent green paste to the wound, causing Sarah to wince. "This will draw out the poison. Sleep now." But sleep wouldn't come easily for Sarah. As Hannah moved away to prepare more medicines, memories that Sarah had suppressed for survival's sake began to surface, not as coherent narratives, but as jagged fragments that cut through her consciousness. A car. Golden afternoon light on prairie grass, as Andrew pointed out a hawk circling overhead. 8-year-old Emma Cooper, practicing her letters in the dirt beside the wagons, while her mother prepared the evening meal. Wagon Master Holloway consulting. His compass, his weathered face creased with concern as he studied the horizon. The shock on Andrew's face as the first bullet struck him, his hand reaching for hers even as he fell. Hannah returned to find Sarah trembling, tears streaming silently down her face. "Your body heals," the old woman said softly, "but your spirit bleeds still." Sarah wiped at her tears with a shaking hand. "I should have died with them." Hannah shook her head firmly. "No, you lived for a purpose. The Creator does not preserve life without reason." She settled beside Sarah, her movements slow with age, but deliberate. "Tell me what happened. Not for my curiosity, but for your healing." At first, the words came haltingly. Sarah had spoken little during her weeks alone, her voice grown unused to forming sentences. But gradually, the story emerged. Not in perfect chronological order, but in the way trauma is remembered, with certain moments crystallized in perfect, terrible detail, while others remained blurred. She and Andrew had joined the wagon train in St. Louis, heading for Oregon Territory, where land was available for homesteading. Andrew, a third-generation Virginia farmer whose family lands had been destroyed in the war, had dreamed of building something new in the West. Their wagon had been modest but well-provisioned. They'd had little of value beyond practical tools, some family silver, and their hopes for the future. The wagon master, Samuel Holloway, was a former Union cavalry officer who had traded military life for guiding settlers west. Quiet and efficient, he had kept largely to himself, except when giving directions or making decisions about the route. "There were 14 of us," Sarah explained, her voice growing steadier as she spoke. 3 families with children, 2 bachelor. Brothers heading to the gold fields, a widower and his grown son, Andrew and me, and Mr. Holloway. They had traveled without incident for 7 weeks, making good time despite occasional bad weather. Then, 3 days before the attack, Holloway's demeanor had changed. He'd become agitated, consulting his maps more frequently, changing their route to a less-traveled trail that he claimed would be safer. The night before it happened, I saw him burying something beneath his wagon, Sarah recalled. He saw me watching and said he was just securing his valuables. I thought nothing of it then. The attack came just before dawn. Men on horseback surrounded the circled wagons, claiming to be government surveyors checking for illegal settlements. Their leader, a tall man with a distinctive scar across his cheek, had asked specifically for Holloway. They took him aside for private conversation. When he refused whatever they wanted, Sarah's voice faltered. They shot him where he stood. Then they started searching the wagons, becoming angrier when they didn't find what they were looking for. What followed was methodical slaughter. The bachelor brothers were shot when they tried to resist. The families were dragged from their wagons. Andrew had pushed Sarah under their wagon, telling her to stay silent no matter what happened. He tried to reason with them, Sarah said, her eyes distant with memory. Told them we had silver they could take. The leader just laughed and said, "We're not thieves, sir. We're patriots." The killing had been efficient, emotionless. Men, women, children, no one was spared. Sarah, hidden beneath the wagon, covered by a fallen tarpaulin, had watched through a small gap as boots moved from body to body, ensuring no survivors. "I lied earlier," she admitted to Hannah, shame coloring her voice. "I didn't bury them. I couldn't. I was too afraid to move until nightfall. By then the men had gone, taking what supplies they wanted, burning 3 of the wagons. I checked, each person hoping—" She shook her head. There was no one left to save. In darkness, she had searched the wagon master's body, remembering the map he'd hidden. She found it in an inner pocket of his jacket, along with a small leather-bound journal she'd taken as well. Then, knowing the killers might return, she had fled into the wilderness with only what she could carry. Her husband's watch, their marriage certificate, some hardtack, and the mysterious documents that had somehow cost 14 lives. "I climbed as high as I could," Sarah finished. "Found the cave by accident when I fell against the mountainside during a rainstorm. I thought I would die there, but each morning I woke still breathing, so I kept going." Hannah had listened without interruption, her lined face impassive, but her eyes reflecting deep compassion. When Sarah fell silent, the old woman pressed a cup of herbal tea into her hands. "Drink. This will help you sleep without dreams." Sarah accepted the cup gratefully. "The map," she said, suddenly remembering the precious document. "Where is it?" "Safe," Hannah assured her. "All your belongings are here." She indicated the small pouch on a nearby shelf. "No one will take them." As the medicine took effect, Sarah felt the sharp edges of her memories begin to blur. "They'll come looking for it," she murmured, fighting against encroaching sleep. "The man with the scarred face, he'll find me." Hannah placed a gentle hand on Sarah's forehead. "Not today. Today you rest and begin to heal. Tomorrow is soon. Enough to face what must be faced." As Sarah drifted into the first peaceful sleep she'd known in weeks, Hannah moved to the lodge entrance where Elijah waited patiently. "She will live," the old woman said quietly. "Her body is stronger than it appears." "And her spirit?" Elijah asked. Hannah's expression grew troubled. "That remains to be seen. She carries more than physical wounds." She glanced back at the sleeping woman. "She also carries something dangerous, something men are willing to kill for. The chief is right to be concerned." "I promise to help her," Elijah said firmly. Hannah regarded him with knowing eyes. "Be careful, grandson. Promises made to broken spirits bind more tightly than you know." As dusk settled over White Pine Haven, an uneasy quiet descended with it. In the chief's lodge, Elijah and Grey Wolf examined the journal Sarah had taken from the wagon master, searching for clues to the map's significance. In the healing lodge, Sarah slept the dreamless sleep of the deeply exhausted, unaware that miles away a man with a scarred face was interrogating a terrified trapper who reported seeing smoke from a small fire high on Blackstone Mountain 3. Days earlier, the hunt was far from over. Dawn broke over White Pine Haven, bathing the settlement in soft golden light. Smoke rose from cooking fires as the community began its daily routines. Women grinding corn, men preparing for hunting or fieldwork, children carrying water from the stream that wound through the valley. Yet beneath this ordinary rhythm ran an undercurrent of tension. Word had spread about the wounded woman Elijah had brought from the mountain, and with it whispers of danger approaching. In the chief's lodge, Elijah stood before a council of 7, the settlement's leaders, both Cherokee and white. Chief Grey Wolf sat at the center, flanked by Hannah the medicine woman and Joshua Blackwood, a former Union soldier who had married a Cherokee woman and integrated fully into the community. The others included Reverend Miller, who ministered to both native and white residents, Swift Deer, the settlement's master hunter, Martha Blackwood, Joshua's wife, and Keetoowah, a Cherokee elder whose knowledge of tribal history was unmatched. "The journal confirms what I suspected," Grey Wolf said, his voice grave as he addressed the council. "Samuel Holloway was carrying information vital to the military, a map showing Windfall Pass." Joshua Blackwood leaned forward, his weathered face creased with concern. "I served under General Sherman, never heard of any Windfall Pass." "Because it was kept secret," the chief replied, "even from most military men." He turned to Keetoowah, nodding for the elder to continue. Keetoowah, whose memory stretched back to before the forced relocations, spoke in Cherokee first, then translated for the non-speakers. During the war, when both sides sought advantage, a Cherokee guide showed Union commanders a hidden mountain passage. This route allowed troops to move undetected through territory thought impassable, surprising Confederate forces from behind. The military named it Windfall Pass for the unexpected advantage it provided. "And now someone is killing to keep it secret," Swiftier observed, "or to claim it for themselves." Martha Blackwood, who had remained silent until now, spoke up. "Why would a passage used in the war matter now, 10 years later? The fighting is over." Her question hung in the air, unanswered, until Elijah stepped forward. "Not all fighting ends with a peace treaty," he said quietly. "The journal mentions rumors of gold discovered near the pass, gold on Cherokee land that certain government officials want to access without negotiating rights." Reverend Miller shook his head in disgust. "Always comes back to gold, doesn't it? Men's souls blackened by greed." "The woman," Hannah interjected. "What role does she play in this? Is she merely an accidental survivor, or was her presence on that wagon train purposeful?" All eyes turned to Elijah, who had spent the most time with Sarah. "I believe she knew nothing of the map until after the massacre. Her husband was a farmer seeking land in Oregon. According to her account, they joined Holloway's wagon train in St. Louis by chance." "Chance," Keetoowah echoed skeptically. "The Creator seldom works through mere chance." Grey Wolf raised a hand, silencing further discussion. "Whether by design or accident, Sarah Mitchell now carries knowledge that powerful men want buried. Her presence here puts White Pine Haven at risk." He fixed Elijah with a penetrating stare. "You brought her to us. What do you propose we do?" Elijah had anticipated this question, had wrestled with it through the long night. "We help her reach Fort Gibson. The commander there, Colonel Davis, is known to be honorable. With the map and journal as evidence, he can launch an official investigation into the massacre. And if these killers find us before she reaches Fort Gibson," Swiftdeer challenged, "and what then?" "We've defended this valley before," Joshua Blackwood reminded them. "We can do it again if necessary." "Against hostiles, yes," Swiftdeer countered. "Against the U.S. government, that's a different battle entirely." Heated discussion erupted, voices rising as opinions clashed. Some advocated helping Sarah reach safety, while others argued for asking her to leave immediately, taking the danger with her. The debate might have continued indefinitely had Hannah not slammed her walking stick against the ground, the sharp crack silencing all present. "The woman is awake," she announced. "She should speak for herself." As if summoned by the declaration, Sarah appeared in the lodge entrance, pale but standing under her own power. She wore a simple dress provided by the settlement women, her auburn hair freshly washed and braided. The haunted look in her eyes remained, but alongside it burned something new, determination. "I heard my name," she said, her voice stronger than the previous day. "If you're discussing my fate, I should be part of that conversation." Grey Wolf studied her for a long moment, then gestured to an empty place in the circle. "Join us, Sarah Mitchell. Your voice is welcome here." Sarah moved carefully to the indicated spot, her wounded side still causing her pain. Elijah noticed. She carried the leather pouch containing the map and journal, clutched tightly in one hand, as if afraid to let it out of her possession. "I understand I've brought danger to your home," she began without preamble. "For that, I'm deeply sorry. I didn't choose this burden, but it's mine nonetheless." She looked around the circle, meeting each person's gaze directly. "I won't stay where I'm not wanted, but before I go, I need to understand what this map means and why 14 innocent people died because of it." "You truly didn't know what your wagon master carried?" Martha Blackwood asked, studying Sarah's face for any sign of deception. "No," Sarah replied firmly. "Mr. Holloway kept to himself. He was efficient, professional, but not forthcoming about his past. I only learned he had been a Union officer after—" She paused, steadying herself. "After I searched his body for identification and found the map and journal instead." "Have you read the journal?" Grey Wolf inquired. Sarah nodded. "Some portions. It's partly in code, but there are passages about Holloway being contacted by someone in Washington, someone high-ranking who warned him about interested parties tracking him. He wrote about needing to reach Fort Gibson to deliver what he called irrefutable evidence of corruption." Joshua Blackwood exchanged glances with Grey. "Wolf, that supports what we've pieced together. Holloway wasn't just carrying a map of a strategic mountain pass. He was carrying proof that someone in the government was planning to exploit it illegally. For gold," Sarah added, "on Cherokee land." She turned to Elijah. "That's why you're involved. This concerns your people directly." Elijah nodded. "The pass crosses through protected territory. If its existence became widely known, particularly with rumors of gold, there would be another rush," Reverend Miller finished grimly, "like California, like the Black Hills. And once again, treaties would be broken, promises forgotten." Sarah opened the leather pouch and carefully withdrew the folded map. "This has cost too many lives already. I want to see it destroyed, but not before it helps bring justice for those who died." Her voice caught slightly. "For Andrew, for the Cooper children, for all of them." "Justice is rarely simple," Kitua observed, "especially when powerful. Men fear exposure." "The man who led the attack," Sarah continued, "the one with the scarred face, he wasn't just some hired gun. He spoke like an educated man, gave orders with military precision. When he killed, there was no emotion in it, just efficiency. Swift Deer leaned forward. Can you describe him in detail? If he comes to our valley, we should know his face. Sarah closed her eyes briefly, summoning a memory she had tried to suppress. Tall, perhaps 40 years old, brown hair beginning to grey at the temples, clean-shaven, right-handed. The scar runs from his left temple down to his jawline. Old, white, like it happened many years ago. His eyes, she faltered. His eyes were the coldest I've ever seen. Blue, but somehow colorless at the same time. Joshua Blackwood cursed under his breath. Major Richard Hollister, he said, the name clearly tasting bitter on his tongue. I served with him briefly. Special assignments, intelligence gathering. He wasn't regular army, reported directly to the War Department. You're certain? Gray? Wolf asked sharply. Joshua nodded. That scar is distinctive. Got it in 62 at Shiloh. Man was ruthless even then, willing to sacrifice anyone to complete his mission. He turned to Sarah. If he's involved, this goes beyond simple greed. Hollister doesn't pursue trivial matters. The journal mentions a Major H several times, Sarah confirmed. Holloway seemed to fear him specifically. A heavy silence fell over the lodge as the council absorbed this information. The threat they faced was not merely from faceless government agents or opportunistic criminals, but from a specific dangerous man with resources and authority behind him. I won't bring this evil to your doorstep, Sarah said finally. I'll leave today. Try to reach Fort Gibson alone. You wouldn't make it 10 miles, Hannah stated flatly. Your body still heals, your spirit still bleeds, and Hollister's men are already searching the area, Elijah added. The trapper who came through yesterday reported armed men questioning everyone on the eastern trails. Grey Wolf raised his hand, signaling for attention. The council will decide this matter, he announced. Those in favor of helping Sarah Mitchell reach Fort Gibson with her evidence, stand. Elijah rose immediately, followed by Hannah and Joshua Blackwood. After a moment's hesitation, Reverend Miller joined them. Martha Blackwood stood next, with Keetuwa rising slowly after her. Only Swift Deer remained seated, his expression troubled. The decision is made, Grey Wolf declared, standing himself. We will help Sarah Mitchell reach Fort Gibson and see justice done for the dead. Swift Deer, though you disagree, I trust you will abide by the council's will? The hunter nodded reluctantly. I will. But I maintain that we invite great danger by this choice. Life is danger, Keetuwa observed philosophically. The question is, which dangers are worth facing? As the council dispersed to begin preparations, Sarah approached Elijah, her amber eyes bright with unshed tears. Why are you all willing to risk so much for a stranger? Elijah considered her question carefully before answering. Because we understand what it means to have your people murdered while the world looks away. Because justice denied anywhere diminishes justice everywhere, he paused. And because some battles choose us rather than us choosing them. Outside the lodge, the morning had progressed, the sun climbing higher as White Pine Haven continued its daily rhythms. Children played, women worked, men hunted and built, ordinary lives unfolding in the shadow of approaching conflict. Sarah watched this peaceful scene with a mixture of gratitude and guilt, knowing that her presence threatened everything these people had built. Yet for the first time since emerging from that mountain cave, she felt something beyond fear and grief, a fragile, tentative hope that perhaps her survival had purpose beyond mere chance, that perhaps, in this unlikely haven, she had found not just shelter but allies in her quest for justice. What she couldn't know was that 20 miles to the east, Major Richard Hollister was systematically working his way through every settlement, every trading post, every isolated cabin, and that with each interrogation, the circle was tightening around White Pine Haven. Fort Gibson loomed like a distant promise. 5 days' hard journey through terrain as beautiful as it was treacherous. Between White Pine Haven and that sanctuary of military justice lay the sprawling expanse of the Blackstone Wilderness, a landscape of jagged peaks, hidden valleys, rushing rivers, and ancient forests that had remained largely unmapped by white. Settlers Elijah stood at the valley's edge with Sarah and Joshua Blackwood, surveying the territory they would need to traverse. A late summer sun beat down upon them, casting long shadows across the wild landscape that stretched to the horizon. "The main trails will be watched," Joshua observed, his experienced eyes scanning the distant ridgelines. "Hollister knows the region too well for us to risk the established routes." Sarah studied the hand-drawn map Joshua had prepared for their journey, not Holloway's controversial document, which remained securely hidden, but a rough guide to the unmarked paths they would follow. "We'll need to cross 3 rivers," Elijah explained, tracing the route with his finger. "The Blackstone here, widest but shallowest, the Thunder River 2 days east, narrower but with treacherous currents. And finally, the Serpentine, just before we reach Fort Territory." Sarah frowned at the winding path. "This route takes us directly through the mountains rather than around them. Won't that be more difficult?" Joshua nodded grimly. "More difficult. Yes, but also less predictable. Hollister will expect us to take the easier route around the northern foothills. That's where he'll concentrate his search. The mountains have protected my people for generations," Elijah added. "They'll protect us now if we respect their power." The mountains. Sarah glanced up at the towering peaks that had been both her prison and her salvation. For 19 days, those stone giants had hidden her from her pursuers, their caves sheltering her, their streams sustaining her, their unforgiving terrain testing her will to survive. She had come to know their moods, how morning mist clung to the slopes like reluctant dreams, how afternoon thunderstorms gathered with frightening speed, how winds sang through the pine forests at dusk like spirits whispering ancient secrets. "I survived them once," she said quietly. "I can face them again." Joshua clapped her shoulder approvingly. "That's the spirit." He glanced back toward the settlement where final preparations were underway. "We'll depart before dawn tomorrow. 3 of us traveling light can move faster than Hollister's search parties." When Joshua left to check their provisions, Sarah remained with Elijah at the overlook, her eyes fixed on the wilderness before them. "Tell me about Windfall Pass," she requested. "What makes it so valuable that men would kill for it?" Elijah was silent for a moment, organizing his thoughts. "Imagine controlling the only door through an otherwise impenetrable wall," he finally said. "Traditional routes through these mountains add weeks to a journey, forcing travelers to follow river valleys that snake around rather than through the range." He pointed to a distant formation where 2 peaks seemed to almost touch. Somewhere there, the exact location known only to a few Cherokee guides, lies a narrow passage that cuts directly through the heart of the Blackstone Range. A 3-day journey instead of 3 weeks. During the war, such a route would have been strategically valuable, Sarah acknowledged. But now, is it really just about gold? "Gold is part of it," Elijah confirmed, "but the larger value is control. Whoever controls the pass controls access to territories beyond, fertile valleys, hunting grounds, and yes, mineral deposits that lie on protected Cherokee land." His expression darkened. "If the government officially discovers this route, our treaties become worthless overnight. They'll claim military necessity, build outposts, and within a year, settlers will pour through." Sarah understood all too well. Her own family had settled on Virginia land that had once belonged to indigenous peoples, a fact her father had acknowledged with regret in his later years. History repeating its cruel pattern, generation after generation. And Holloway? Where does he fit in this? From his journal, it seems he discovered a conspiracy within the War Department to secretly map and claim the pass, bypassing formal treaties. Elijah's voice held a note of respect for the wagon master. Instead of participating, he gathered evidence of the plan and was attempting to deliver it to Colonel Davis at Fort Gibson, an officer known for enforcing treaty rights. The full weight of what she carried settled on Sarah's shoulders. Not just a map, but evidence of high-level corruption that threatened an entire people's sovereignty. 14 innocent lives had already been sacrificed to keep this conspiracy hidden. How many more would follow? As if reading her thoughts, Elijah spoke gently. You can still choose not to go. Grey Wolf would understand. We could destroy the map, burn the journal. Sarah shook her head firmly. And let those murders go unpunished? Let Andrew's death mean nothing? Her fingers unconsciously touched the wedding ring she still wore. No, we finish what Holloway started. Their conversation was interrupted by Hannah's arrival, the elder moving with surprising agility despite her years. She carried a small bundle wrapped in tanned deerskin. For the journey, she explained, handing it to Sarah. Medicines, healing herbs. Your wound improves but is not fully healed. Sarah accepted the gift with gratitude. Thank you for your care. I wouldn't have survived without it. Hannah's weathered face remained impassive, but her eyes softened. Listen to me now, young one. The mountains you enter are not merely stone and tree. They live, they watch, they remember. She glanced at Elijah, switching briefly to Cherokee before returning to English. My grandson knows their ways, but even he must treat them with respect. What should I know? Sarah asked, sensing the importance behind Hannah's words. 3 rules to survive the Blackstone wilderness, Hannah replied. First, never waste what the mountain offers: water, shelter, food. Take only what you need. Use all that you take. Second, make no unnecessary noise. Sound carries farther than you think, and some things that listen are neither animal nor man. Third, her voice dropped lower, if you see lights dancing on the peaks at night, do not follow them, no matter how beautiful they appear. Before Sarah could ask about this cryptic warning, Swift Deer approached, his expression still disapproving but resigned. The horses are ready, he announced. 1 mount each, plus a pack horse for supplies. Horses? Sarah questioned. Wouldn't we move more quietly on foot? Through the first valleys, yes, Elijah explained. But once we enter the high country, we'll need their strength and speed. There are stretches no human could cross in the time we have. Swift Deer's stern face showed a flicker of something like reluctant respect at Sarah's question. You'll ride Thunder, he told her, gesturing toward the settlement's corral where 3 horses waited. He's steady on mountain trails and doesn't spook easily. Sarah followed his gaze to a muscular blue roan gelding with intelligent eyes. I haven't ridden since before. She stopped, memories threatening to overwhelm her. The body remembers what the mind tries to forget, Hannah said simply. You'll ride well enough. The day passed in a flurry of final preparations. The settlement worked together seamlessly, packing dried meat, cornmeal and berries, filling waterskins, providing extra ammunition for the weapons they would carry. Sarah observed this coordinated effort with growing appreciation for the community Elijah called home. Children too young to understand the danger raced around the busy adults, turning preparations into a game. Sarah found herself smiling at their antics, the first genuine smile that had crossed her face since the massacre. A small girl of about 6 approached her shyly, offering a carefully woven bracelet of colored threads. For protection, the child explained solemnly. My mother says, you're very brave. Sarah knelt to accept the gift, her throat tight with unexpected emotion. Thank you, she managed. What's your name? Morning Star, the girl replied, then darted away to rejoin her friends. Watching her go, Sarah felt the hard shell she had built around her heart since the massacre crack just slightly. She had survived by numbing herself, by transforming grief and fear into a protective fortress. But here, among these people who had taken her in, despite the danger she brought, that fortress was becoming harder to maintain. As evening approached, Grey Wolf called the community together for a ceremony to bless the journey. The entire settlement gathered around the central fire, where Kituwa led prayers in Cherokee, while Reverend Miller offered parallel blessings in English. The harmony between the two traditions reflected the unique balance this community had achieved, neither fully assimilated nor entirely separate, but something new forged from mutual respect. After the formal prayers, a meal was shared, simple but plentiful. Music followed, the haunting sound of a Cherokee flute mingling with a fiddle played by one of the white settlers. In another time, Sarah might have found joy in such a gathering. Tonight, she sat slightly apart, watching the faces illuminated by firelight, committing each to memory. "They celebrate life," Elijah said, settling beside her, "even knowing what tomorrow may bring." "How can they?" Sarah asked, "with such danger approaching?" "Because of it," he replied. "My people have faced extinction many times over many generations. We've learned that each moment of peace must be honored, each chance." For Joy embraced. He nodded toward the dancers circling the fire. "Tomorrow's troubles will come regardless. Tonight belongs to the living." Sarah considered his words. For weeks, she had existed in a liminal space, not truly living, not quite dead, suspended, between the person she had been before the massacre and whoever she might become after. The weight of survival guilt had kept her tethered to that terrible morning, replaying events she couldn't change, mourning lives she couldn't save. "Andrew loved dancing," she said suddenly, surprising herself by speaking his name without pain. "He was terrible at it, always stepping on my toes, but so enthusiastic, no one had the heart to tell him." Elijah smiled gently. "Tell me more about him." And surprisingly, Sarah found she could. Sitting beneath a star-filled sky, with celebrations swirling around them, she spoke of Andrew's dream to grow apple orchards in Oregon, of his habit of reading aloud from favorite books, of his terrible singing voice that he inflicted on their fellow travelers during long days on the trail. With each memory shared, she reclaimed a piece of him that grief had obscured. "He would have liked it here," she concluded, looking around at the settlement. "He believed people of different backgrounds could live together if they chose to see each other as human first." "A wise man," Elijah observed, "and clearly one who loved deeply." He hesitated, then added, "Those we lose never truly leave us." Cherokee believed the spirits of those who pass suddenly often linger to watch over those they loved. A younger Sarah might have dismissed such a notion, but the woman who had survived a massacre and 19 days alone in the wilderness was less certain of the dividing line between the possible and impossible. There had been moments in the cave when she'd felt Andrew's presence so strongly she could almost hear his voice, urging her to continue fighting, to keep living. "Do you think they find peace?" she asked. "The ones who die violently?" "When justice is done," Elijah replied, "when the story of their passing is told truthfully, when those left behind honor their memory by living fully." He stood, offering his hand. "Come, join the dance, just for a moment." Sarah hesitated, then accepted his hand, allowing herself to be drawn toward the firelight. For one dance, just one, she would step away from grief and fear. Tomorrow would bring the wilderness, with all its dangers and challenges. Tonight, surrounded by unexpected allies, she would remember how to live. As the music swelled and the stars wheeled overhead, Sarah moved in rhythm with the community that had taken her in. And somewhere deep in her wounded spirit, a small spark reignited, not happiness, not yet, but its necessary precursor, hope. Beyond the settlement's protective walls, the Blackstone wilderness waited in silent majesty, its peaks silvered by moonlight, its valleys shrouded in shadow, its ancient paths holding secrets both sacred and profane. By morning light, Sarah would enter its domain once more, not as a desperate fugitive, but as a woman with purpose, with allies, with a story that demanded to be told. The mountains had saved her once. Whether they would do so again remained to be written in the days. Ahead, they departed White Pine Haven in the hushed darkness before dawn, when the world existed in shades of grey and black. No formal farewells marked their leaving. Only Grey Wolf, Hannah, and Swift Deer witnessed their departure, the chief offering a silent blessing, the medicine woman pressing a small stone amulet into Sarah's hand, and the hunter providing last-minute guidance about game trails to Joshua. Sarah rode between the two men, her body remembering the rhythm of horseback travel more readily than she had expected. Thunder, her blue roan mount, moved with confident steps despite the dim light, following Elijah's paint horse along narrow paths that wound through dense forest at the valley's edge. For the first hour, no one spoke. The only sounds were the horse's hooves on soft earth, the occasional call of early waking birds, and the whisper of wind through pine boughs overhead. This silence wasn't uncomfortable, but necessary, both for stealth and for the mental preparation each rider needed for the journey ahead. As dawn spread pale fingers of light across the eastern sky, they reached the valley's boundary and began their ascent into the true wilderness. Here the terrain grew steeper, the path narrower, forcing them to ride single file with Joshua taking the rear position. Sarah found herself studying Elijah's back as he led them, noting how he seemed to become more alert, more attuned to his surroundings with each passing mile. When they paused to rest the horses at a small stream, Sarah finally broke the silence. "You've changed since we entered the mountains," she observed. "You move differently, watch differently." Elijah smiled slightly as he refilled their water skins. "This is my true element. In the settlement, I'm a visitor to the white man's world. Even when welcomed, here," he gestured to the wilderness around them, "here I am fully myself." "And what am I here?" Sarah wondered aloud. "Not a farmer's wife anymore, not quite a survivor either, at least not only that. Perhaps," Joshua suggested as he checked his rifle, "you're becoming a warrior." Sarah glanced at him sharply. "I've never fought anyone." "Combat is only one kind of battle," the former soldier replied. "Surviving when others fell, carrying truth, when lies would be easier, facing fears rather than surrendering to them. These are a warrior's traits as well." His words resonated unexpectedly. Sarah had never thought of herself in such terms. In her previous life, she had been defined by her relationships, daughter, sister, wife, and by the domestic skills expected of women. The massacre had stripped away those identities, leaving her adrift in a wilderness both literal and figurative. "I don't know if I'm strong enough," she admitted, voicing the fear that had shadowed her since leaving the cave. To face Hollister again, to speak the truth against powerful men. "Strength isn't about fearlessness," Elijah said quietly. "It's about continuing despite fear." They resumed their journey, climbing higher into the mountains as the day warmed. Around them, the forest changed subtly, hardwoods giving way to pines and spruce, underbrush thinning as the altitude increased. By midday, they had reached a ridgeline that offered their first clear view of the territory they would need to cross. Sarah gazed eastward, where distant mountains faded into blue haze. Somewhere beyond those peaks lay Fort Gibson and the possibility of justice. Between here and there stretched a vast wilderness of forested slopes, rocky terrain, and winding rivers. The immensity of their task settled on her shoulders like a physical weight. "We'll reach the Blackstone River crossing by nightfall," Joshua said, interpreting her expression correctly. "One step at a time, One step at a time, she echoed, the simple wisdom anchoring her against overwhelming odds. They continued along the ridgeline for several miles before beginning their descent toward the river valley. As they rode, Joshua shared stories from his military days, tales carefully chosen to prepare Sarah for what she might face at Fort Gibson. He described Colonel Davis as a principled but practical man, someone who respected treaty rights but also navigated political realities. "He'll want proof beyond the journal and map," Joshua explained. "Your testimony will be essential, and it will be challenged." Sarah nodded, understanding the implication. "They'll try to discredit me, a hysterical woman traumatized by tragedy, inventing conspiracy to explain a simple attack by hostiles." "Exactly," Joshua confirmed. "Hollister and whoever commands him will have established their official narrative already. 14 settlers killed by indigenous raiders, a tragic but common occurrence on the frontier." "So my word against theirs," Sarah said bitterly. "Not just your word," Elijah reminded her. "The journal contains names, dates, locations, details that can be verified. And the map itself is military grade, impossible for a simple wagon master to have created without inside help." They fell silent as the path narrowed dangerously, requiring full attention to navigate a steep switchback descent. Sarah focused on maintaining her balance as Thunder picked his way carefully down the slope, loose stones occasionally sliding beneath his hooves. The pack horse, following behind Joshua, whinnied nervously, but continued forward, testament to its training. When they reached more level ground, Joshua resumed their conversation. "There's something else you should prepare for," he said, his tone grave. "At Fort Gibson, you'll likely face questions about why you alone survived." Sarah stiffened in the saddle. This was the burden she carried most heavily, the question that haunted her sleepless nights. Why her? Why had she lived when Andrew died, when the Cooper children died, when everyone else perished? "I've asked myself the same question 1,000 times, she admitted, her voice barely audible above the sounds of their travel. "Why me?" Survivor's guilt, Joshua named it, with the directness of someone who had experienced it himself. "It's a shadow that follows those who live through what others don't. During the war, I watched men destroy themselves with that question when no meaningful answer existed." "What answer is there?" Sarah asked. "Pure chance, divine intervention. Neither seems sufficient explanation for such randomness." Elijah, who had remained silent during this exchange, finally spoke. "My people believe that those who survive, when others perish, carry an obligation to bear witness, to honor the dead through how they live afterward." He glanced back at her. "Perhaps you survived because someone needed to tell their story truly." The simplicity of this perspective offered Sarah no easy comfort, but provided a framework for meaning that her anguished questioning had lacked. If her survival served a purpose beyond mere chance, if she could transform her continued existence into justice for those lost, perhaps the crushing weight of guilt might eventually lighten. They reached the Blackstone River as sunset painted the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. The water flowed swift but shallow, just as Elijah had predicted, with a gravel ford that would allow relatively easy crossing. They made camp on the near side, deciding to tackle the crossing with fresh horses in the morning light. As Joshua prepared a small, nearly smokeless fire, and Elijah secured the horses, Sarah found herself drawn to the riverbank. She knelt beside the clear, cold water, watching as it flowed ceaselessly eastward, the same direction they traveled, the same water that would eventually pass near Fort Gibson. Without fully intending to, she uncapped the leather pouch she had carried since the massacre and withdrew Holloway's journal. She had read portions before, but always searching for specific information. Now she opened it to the beginning, seeking to understand the man whose actions had inadvertently led to so much death. The early entries were mundane: weather conditions, miles traveled, supplies inventoried. But as she continued reading, a more complex portrait emerged. Samuel Holloway, 47 years old, former Union cavalry captain, widowed during the war when illness swept through his hometown. A man who had seen enough violence to last several lifetimes, who had sought peaceful work guiding settlers west, who had unexpectedly found himself drawn back into conflict when he discovered corruption within the government he had once served. An entry from 3 months before the massacre caught her attention. May 12th, met with L today in St. Louis, confirmed what I suspected about the Windfall Pass operation. Not just localized corruption, but systemic, reaching to War Department itself. L provided documents showing W's signature on authorization for resource exploration in treaty-protected lands. When official discovery of the pass is announced, certain investors will be positioned to claim mining rights immediately. Indigenous objections will be deemed irrelevant to national security interests. L fears for his safety, says W's men are watching him, have agreed to transport key documents. Do Davis at Fort Gibson must assemble wagon train as cover. God help me if I'm discovered. Sarah stared at the words, understanding flooding through her. Holloway hadn't randomly chosen his passengers. He had deliberately selected ordinary families, believing they would provide better cover than traveling alone or with obvious guards. He had gambled with their lives, never imagining that his pursuers would eliminate everyone to find what he carried. The realization should have angered her. Instead, she felt a complex mixture of emotions: sorrow for Holloway's fatal miscalculation, understanding of his desperate attempt to expose corruption, and a strange sense of relief that her presence on that wagon train hadn't been entirely arbitrary. She and Andrew hadn't died for nothing. They had unknowingly been part of an attempt to expose a grave injustice. Find anything useful? She looked up to find Elijah standing nearby, his expression concerned, but respectful of her private. A moment. Holloway knew he was being hunted, she said, closing the journal carefully. He thought traveling with families would protect him, protect all of us. He never imagined they would kill everyone. Elijah sat beside her on the riverbank. He underestimated their ruthlessness. As did I, Sarah acknowledged. When they first surrounded our wagons, I thought it was a robbery at worst. Even as they began shooting, some part of me couldn't believe it was happening. She stared into the flowing water. I keep thinking there was something I could have done. Some warning I missed. Some action I could have taken. That thinking leads nowhere but deeper pain, Elijah said gently. Trust me in this. She glanced at him, noting the shadow that crossed his features. You've lost people too. He nodded. My parents, my younger sister, my first wife. Some to disease, some to violence, some to the forced relocations. His gaze met hers directly. Each loss taught me that yesterday cannot be changed, only honored. Tomorrow remains unmade. And today, Sarah asked. Today we cross rivers, he replied with simple wisdom, both the ones before us and the ones within us. From their campfire, Joshua called that the meal was ready. As they rejoined him, Sarah realized something had shifted within her. The burden of survival remained, as did the grief and guilt, but alongside these familiar companions now stood a clearer sense of purpose. She wasn't merely fleeing from tragedy anymore. She was moving toward justice, carrying truth that others had died to protect. That night, as they took turns keeping watch, Sarah dreamed not of the massacre, as was usually the case, but of Andrew walking beside her on a sunlit path, smiling as he pointed toward the eastern horizon. Upon waking for her watch shift, she found her face wet with tears. Not the bitter tears of grief alone, but the complex mixture of sorrow and gratitude that comes with beginning to heal. Dawn found them crossing the Blackstone River, water swirling. around their horses' legs as they picked their way across the gravel ford. On the eastern bank, Sarah paused once to look back at the mountains behind them, where a solitary eagle circled against the morning sky. Then she turned her face eastward, toward whatever awaited them in the wilderness ahead. The burden she carried. Survivors. Guilt, grief, responsibility for the truth hadn't diminished. But somehow, in crossing that first river, she had found a way to carry it differently, with purpose rather than merely endurance. One step at a time, one river at a time, one truth at a time. The second day of their journey took them deeper into increasingly unfamiliar territory. The relatively open valley of the Blackstone River gave way to dense forest that closed around them like a living presence. Here, ancient trees crowded so closely together that sunlight reached the forest floor only in dappled patterns, creating an otherworldly atmosphere of green-tinted shadows and unexpected light. Sarah found herself grateful for Elijah's guidance. What appeared to her eyes as undifferentiated wilderness revealed itself, through his knowledge, as a landscape rich with meaning and direction. He identified nearly invisible game trails, pointed out medicinal plants growing alongside poisonous lookalikes, and read the movements of animals and birds for signs of potential danger. "How did you learn all this?" she asked, during a brief rest to water the horses at a small spring. "My grandfather began teaching me when I was 4, Elijah replied, kneeling to examine tracks pressed into the soft earth near the water. Every season for years, he would take me deeper into the mountains, showing me how to listen to what the forest tells us." "And what is it telling you now?" Joshua asked, a note of tension in his voice as he observed Elijah's careful study of the tracks. Elijah's expression remained neutral, but Sarah caught the subtle shift in his posture. "Men passed this way yesterday, 5, maybe 6, heading east like us." "Hollister's men?" Sarah asked, her throat tightening with fear. "No," Elijah replied, pointing to distinctive markings in one of the prints. "These are moccasins, not military. Boots. Cherokee hunters, most likely. This territory is sometimes used for seasonal hunting by bands from the eastern settlements." Joshua relaxed visibly. "Friendlies, then?" "Probably," Elijah agreed, though Sarah noticed he didn't sound entirely convinced. "Not all Cherokee welcome outsiders in their hunting grounds, especially white outsiders." They continued onward, the forest growing denser as they progressed. By mid-afternoon, Sarah's sense of direction had become completely confused by the winding path they followed, sometimes doubling back, other times crossing small streams multiple times, as if deliberately creating a difficult trail to follow. "Ah, we lost?" she finally asked Joshua, who rode beside her while Elijah scouted ahead. The former soldier chuckled. "Quite the opposite. Elijah's making sure anyone tracking us gets lost. Standard evasion tactics, though he executes them better than most military scouts I've known." Their conversation was interrupted by Elijah's return. His expression, normally calm and measured, showed clear concern. "We need to change course," he announced without preamble. "There's a Cherokee hunting party camped 2 miles ahead directly in our path." "You said they were friendlies," Joshua reminded him. "These aren't from the eastern bands," Elijah replied. "They're Western Cherokee, those who accepted government relocation years ago. Their relationship with those who remained, like my people, is complicated." Sarah glanced between the two men, sensing underlying tensions she didn't fully understand. "Would they harm us?" "Not you and Joshua, most likely," Elijah answered, "but my presence with white travelers on traditional hunting grounds would raise questions I'd rather avoid." "Can we go around them?" Joshua asked. Elijah nodded. "There's a route through Talon Ridge to the south, rougher terrain, but it will bypass their camp entirely." The decision made, they altered their course, turning south toward a series of rocky outcroppings that jutted from the forest like the vertebrae of some enormous buried creature. The path grew steeper, requiring them to dismount and lead the horses through particularly challenging sections. As they climbed, Sarah found herself studying Elijah with new curiosity. She had known he was Cherokee, of course, but the encounter with the hunting party had highlighted complexities within indigenous relations that she had never considered. Her education, limited as it was, had presented Indians as a monolithic group, rather than diverse nations with their own internal politics and divisions. "Tell me about the Western Cherokee," she requested as they paused to rest at a level section of the trail. "Why is there tension between them and your people?" Elijah secured the horses before responding. "It's a long, painful history," he began. "When the government demanded all Cherokee relocate west to reservations, our people divided. Some believed resistance was futile and accepted relocation, walking the Trail of Tears to Oklahoma Territory. Others, like my ancestors, refused to leave our ancestral lands. We hid in the most remote mountains, maintaining our ways while adapting enough to survive." "And now the two groups don't get along," Sarah pressed. "It's more complicated than simple discord. Those who relocated made difficult choices to protect their families. Those who remained made equally difficult choices for the same reason." Elijah's gaze drifted toward the distant ridgelines. "But decades later, resentments linger. Some Western Cherokee see us as stubborn traditionalists who make relations with whites more difficult. Some of my people view them as having surrendered too easily." Joshua, who had been checking their back trail, rejoined them. "Politics is politics, whether in Washington or in the wilderness," he observed. "Every group has its factions and disagreements." "True enough," Elijah acknowledged, "which is why I'd rather avoid complications. Our mission is difficult enough without adding tribal politics to our challenges." They continued their arduous climb toward Talon Ridge, the forest thinning as they gained elevation. By late afternoon, they reached a natural stone arch that formed a bridge between two sections of the ridge. Beyond it, the land fell away sharply before rising again toward distant peaks. "We'll camp here tonight," Elijah decided, indicating a relatively flat area beneath the arch's protective span. "It's defensible, with clear sightlines in both directions." As Joshua and Sarah prepared the camp, Elijah disappeared briefly, returning with a brace of rabbits for their evening meal. The simple act of establishing camp, gathering firewood, preparing food, caring for the horses, created a reassuring routine amid the wild uncertainty of their journey. After they had eaten, Sarah found herself drawn to the edge of their campsite, where the land dropped away to reveal a breathtaking vista of the wilderness they had traversed. From this height, the forest that had seemed so imposing at ground level transformed into a vast green sea, rolling in waves toward the horizon. The setting sun painted the landscape in gold and crimson, lending ephemeral beauty to the harsh terrain. "It's easy to forget when you're fighting your way through it how beautiful this land is," Joshua commented, joining her at the overlook. "My father would have called it God's country," Sarah replied, "though I imagine your wife's people would express it differently." Joshua smiled at the mention of Martha. "They would say the Creator placed beauty everywhere for those with eyes to see it." He glanced at her. "You're not what I expected." "What did you expect from Hannah's description? A broken woman, traumatized beyond recovery, someone we would need to protect and guide at every step." He shook his head slightly. "Instead, you've kept pace without complaint, adapted to changes, asked thoughtful questions." Sarah considered this assessment. "I am broken," she admitted, "but perhaps not beyond repair." She gestured toward the wilderness below. "Out here, the things that seemed important before, social conventions, material comforts, they fall away. What remains is simpler. Survive, find justice, honor the dead by how I live." Their conversation was interrupted by Elijah's sudden return from scouting the perimeter. His expression was unreadable as he approached, but Sarah had learned to recognize the subtle tension in his shoulders that signaled concern. "We have visitors," he announced quietly. "3 Cherokee hunters from the camp we avoided. They're approaching." From the south ridge, Joshua immediately moved toward his rifle, but Elijah shook his head. "No need for weapons. They're not hostile, at least not yet. They've seen our fire and are investigating, as they have every right to do in their hunting grounds." "What do we do?" Sarah asked, glancing anxiously toward the direction Elijah had indicated. "We welcome them," he replied simply. "Share our fire and what food remains. Answer their questions truthfully but selectively." He turned to Sarah. "Let me do the talking. They'll likely speak Cherokee among themselves, but most will understand English." Before long, 3 figures emerged from the growing darkness. Men, dressed in a mixture of traditional Cherokee clothing and items of white manufacture. They carried bows and hunting knives rather than firearms, and their expressions as they approached the camp were cautious, but not overtly hostile. The eldest of the 3, a powerfully built man with streaks of gray in his black hair, spoke first in Cherokee. Elijah responded in the same language, his tone respectful but firm. A brief exchange followed before Elijah gestured for the hunters to join them at the fire. "This is Stands Tall," Elijah introduced the leader in English. "With him are his son Wolf Eyes and his nephew Black Fox. They are from the western Cherokee settlement near Fort Gibson." Sarah and Joshua nodded in greeting, receiving measured acknowledgments in return. An awkward silence fell as the hunters settled around the fire, observing the 2 white travelers with undisguised curiosity. "You travel east," Stands Tall finally said in accented but clear English. "Toward Fort Gibson. Why?" Elijah answered before either Sarah or Joshua could respond. "My friends seek the protection of Colonel Davis. There has been violence against settlers to the west, innocent people killed by men claiming military authority." This information visibly interested the Cherokee leader. "These men, they wore uniforms?" "No," Sarah interjected, unable to remain silent. "They claimed to be government surveyors, but they were killers. They murdered my husband, our friends, everyone." Stands Tall studied her intently, his dark eyes missing nothing. "You survived this attack?" "She hid in a mountain cave for nearly 3 weeks, Elijah explained. "I found her there, brought her to my settlement for healing." The hunter's gaze shifted between Sarah and Elijah, something like understanding dawning in his expression. "These killers, they sought something specific?" Sarah hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. Elijah gave an almost imperceptible nod, encouraging her to answer. "A map," she said simply. "They wanted a map our wagon master carried." This revelation caused a rapid exchange in Cherokee between the 3 hunters, too quick for Sarah to follow. Even if she had understood the language, the atmosphere around the fire had shifted from cautious curiosity to intense interest. "A map of what?" Stands Tall pressed. Again, Sarah looked to Elijah, who nodded once more. "Windfall Pass," she answered. The effect was immediate. All 3 hunters straightened, their expressions hardening with recognition of the name. Wolf Eyes, the youngest, spoke urgently to his father in Cherokee, his tone suggesting alarm or anger. Elijah responded at length in their language, his words apparently calming the younger man somewhat. Finally, he turned to Sarah and Joshua. "I've explained that we seek to prevent the pass from being exploited, not to reveal its location to those who would misuse it." Stands Tall regarded them silently for a long moment before speaking again. 2 days ago, armed white men entered our hunting grounds. 6 riders, heavily armed, asking questions about travelers heading east. They claimed to be army, searching for deserters. His eyes fixed on Sarah. "They described a woman matching you." Cold fear settled in Sarah's stomach. "Hollister," she whispered, "Did you tell them anything?" Joshua asked, his hand instinctively moving closer to his weapon. "We told them nothing," Stans Tall replied with dignity. "Our people have learned caution when armed whites ask questions." He turned to Elijah. "But they continue to search. They have split into pairs, covering all paths toward Fort Gibson." This news cast a shadow over their small company. Sarah had known Hollister would pursue them, but hearing confirmation that he was so close, so determined, made the danger immediate and visceral. "What did you tell these men?" Elijah asked. "That we had seen no one," Stans Tall answered. "But they did not believe. They searched still." He studied each of them in turn before continuing. "If what you say is true, if these men killed innocents to possess knowledge of the sacred pass, then they threaten my people as well as yours." "They do," Sarah confirmed, meeting his gaze directly. "The map is part of a plan to claim the pass. For mining interests, bypassing treaties that protect Cherokee lands." Something shifted in Stans Tall's expression, a decision reached after careful consideration. "Then we will help you reach Fort Gibson." His son protested immediately in Cherokee, but the elder hunter silenced him with a gesture. "Our people have suffered enough from white men's greed. If these deaths can be prevented by helping you reach the fort, then it must be done." The simple statement transformed their journey in an instant. What had been 3 travelers trying to evade capture became something more, an alliance formed across cultural divides, united by a common threat and a shared need for justice. "What do you propose?" Joshua asked, military pragmatism asserting itself. "There is another way to Fort Gibson," Stans Tall explained, "a path known only to Cherokee hunters. It follows Thunder River through the deep canyons, difficult terrain but impossible to track." He looked to Elijah. "Your horses cannot make this journey. You must continue on foot." Elijah nodded, accepting this complication without argument. "When do we leave?" "First light," Stans Tall replied. "Wolf Eyes will guide you. Black Fox and I will create false trails to draw pursuers away." He fixed his gaze on Sarah. "The path will be difficult for one not raised in these mountains." "Are you strong enough?" Sarah straightened, meeting his challenge directly. "I survived alone in a cave for 19 days with an untreated wound. I will manage your path." A ghost of a smile touched the hunter's stern features. "Good answer." He rose to his feet. "Rest now. Tomorrow will test your strength." As the 3 hunters moved to the opposite side of the fire to converse privately, Sarah found herself contemplating this unexpected turn in their journey. The arrival of Stans Tall and his companions had catalyzed a fundamental shift from fleeing to purposeful action, from isolated struggle to coordinated effort. She glanced at Elijah, who caught her questioning look. "You trust them?" she asked quietly. "With my life," he replied without hesitation. "Stans Tall is a man of honor, respected among both Western and Eastern Cherokee. If he offers help, we can rely on it completely." As night settled fully around their camp, Sarah stared into the fire, considering how quickly circumstances could change. Yesterday, these hunters had been potential complications to avoid. Today, they were crucial allies. In her former life, such rapid adaptations would have seemed impossible. Now, she understood that survival often depended on embracing unexpected opportunities and trusting unlikely companions. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, abandoning their horses, navigating unfamiliar terrain, placing their lives in the hands of a Cherokee hunter they had just met. Yet somehow these developments felt right, as if the path forward was revealing itself one step at a time. For the first time since the massacre, Sarah felt something like momentum gathering around their cause, as if forces beyond their small group were aligning to ensure the truth reached those who needed to hear it. Whether this feeling represented genuine providence or merely desperate hope, she embraced it as the first real sign that justice might actually be possible. Thunder River earned its name. The water didn't merely flow, it roared, pounding through narrow canyons with such force that conversation became impossible when standing near its banks. To Sarah, following Wolf Eyes along treacherous paths that clung to the canyon walls, the constant thunder was both disorienting and oddly comforting, a natural sound that would mask their passage from any pursuers. They had left the horses with stands tall at dawn, taking only what they could carry. Joshua bore the heaviest load, including their weapons and remaining provisions. Elijah carried their water and survival tools. Sarah, despite her protests, was allowed only a light pack, containing the precious map, journal, and her few personal possessions. Her still-healing wound made the others insist on this arrangement, though she chafed at being treated as the weakest member of their party. Wolf Eyes led them at a punishing pace. The young Cherokee hunter moved with the easy confidence of someone born to this terrain, often disappearing around bends or over rises, only to reappear moments later, impatiently waiting for the others to catch up. His attitude towards Sarah remained skeptical, his dark eyes constantly assessing whether she would become a liability. By midday, they had descended into the heart of the canyon, where sunlight penetrated only briefly at noon, leaving the steep walls in perpetual shadow. The air felt different here, cooler, heavy with moisture from the rushing river, permeated with the scent of moss and stone and ancient things. "We rest," Wolf Eyes announced during one of their brief pauses, the first words he had spoken in hours. Sarah sank gratefully onto a flat rock, her legs trembling with exertion. Though her wound no longer pained her constantly, the physical demands of their journey tested her limits. She accepted the water Elijah offered, drinking deeply before turning her attention to their guide. "How much farther to Fort Gibson?" she asked. Wolf Eyes studied her before answering. 2 days if we maintain pace. 3 if we slow." His English was more heavily accented than his father's, but perfectly clear. "And Hollister's men?" Joshua inquired. "Will they find this trail?" The young hunter shook his head. "Father and cousin make false trails. Draw them north toward Serpentine Ridge." A hint of pride entered his voice. "No white man knows this canyon path." "Except you're leading 3 of us through it now," Sarah observed. Wolf Eyes fixed her with a penetrating stare. "This is necessary risk for all Cherokee." He gestured toward her pack. "That map, it threatens more than just your justice. My people have seen what happens when white men discover gold on our lands. More death, more broken promises." His blunt assessment silenced further questions. They ate quickly, dried meat and berries, before resuming their journey. The canyon narrowed further as they progressed, forcing them to wade through shallow sections of the river where no footpath existed along the sheer walls. The cold water numbed Sarah's legs and threatened her balance, but she refused to show weakness, especially under Wolf Eyes' watchful gaze. When Elijah offered his hand at a particularly difficult crossing, she accepted it without comment, grateful for the support, but determined to prove herself equal to this challenge. By late afternoon, exhaustion began to take its toll. Sarah noticed Joshua favoring his right leg, an old war injury he had mentioned once, while even Elijah's normally fluid movements showed signs of strain. Only Wolf Eyes seemed tireless, though he finally called a halt as shadows lengthened. "Across the canyon. Camp here," he announced, indicating a small gravel beach beside a relatively calm pool in the river. Not safe to travel canyon in darkness. They established a minimal camp, unable to risk a fire in the confined space. Cold. Rations and river water made for a sparse dinner, but Sarah found she was too tired to care. After eating, she moved slightly apart from the others, seeking a moment of privacy to collect her thoughts. The day's arduous journey had left little time for reflection, but now, as twilight deepened around them, memories and fears crowded back. Tomorrow or the next day, they would reach Fort Gibson. What awaited them there? Would Colonel Davis believe her testimony? Would Hollister have agents within the fort itself? Had they endured so much only to walk into another trap? Your thoughts are loud enough to rival the river. She turned to find Elijah settling beside her on the gravel, his presence somehow both surprising and expected. Just wondering what happens when we reach the fort, she admitted. One challenge at a time, he counseled. First the canyon, then Fort Gibson, then justice. Sarah smiled faintly. You make it sound so straightforward. The path is rarely straight, but the direction remains true. He glanced toward Wolf Eyes, who sat apart from them, methodically checking his bow and hunting arrows. He doesn't dislike you, you know. Could have fooled me, Sarah replied dryly. He's cautious, especially around white women. His sister was taken by settlers 3 years ago. She was 15. Elijah's voice remained neutral, but Sarah heard the underlying pain. They found her body a month later. Horror and shame washed through Sarah. I didn't know. How could you? Elijah shrugged slightly. But understanding helps. He sees all white settlers through that experience, just as you might see all strangers through the lens of the massacre. The comparison struck uncomfortably. In close to truth, hadn't she flinched when Stanstall and his hunters first appeared? Hadn't she immediately suspected danger, despite Elijah's assurances? We're shaped by our wounds, she acknowledged softly. But not defined by them, Elijah added. At least not permanently. Their conversation was interrupted by Wolf Eyes approaching. The young hunter's expression remained impassive, but his posture had lost some of its earlier rigidity. We leave. Before dawn, he informed them. Sleep now. I take first watch. After he moved away, Sarah arranged her bedroll on the smoothest patch of gravel she could find. Despite physical exhaustion, sleep proved elusive. The constant sound of the river, the hard ground beneath her, and the tension of their circumstances kept her mind active long after the others had fallen into restless slumber. When she finally drifted off, her dreams were fragmented, images of the massacre intermingled with visions of deep canyons and endless forests. Andrew appeared briefly, standing on the opposite bank of Thunder River, mouth moving in words she couldn't hear above the water's roar. She woke suddenly in the darkest hour of night, heart pounding, unsure what had disturbed her sleep. The river continued its constant thunder, and her companions lay motionless in their bedrolls. Wolf Eyes sat on a boulder at the edge of their camp, back straight, alert despite hours of watch duty. Something felt wrong. Sarah lay perfectly still, straining her senses against the overwhelming presence of the river. Then she caught it, a faint click of stone against stone, too deliberate to be natural, too distinct from the water's chaotic music. Wolf Eyes had heard it too. He rose silently, bow in hand, moving toward the sound's origin. Sarah watched, scarcely breathing, as he disappeared into the shadows upstream. Minutes passed. The tension became unbearable. Finally, Sarah eased from her bedroll and gently shook Elijah awake, placing a finger to her lips when his eyes opened. She motioned toward where Wolf Eyes had vanished, then mimed hearing something. Understanding immediately, Elijah woke Joshua with the same silent warning. Both men reached for their weapons, movements deliberate and noiseless. A sudden shout shattered the night, Wolf Eye's voice raised in alarm or pain, followed by the distinctive crack of a rifle shot that echoed through the canyon. Instantly, their small camp erupted into action. Joshua grabbed his rifle, positioning himself between the sound and Sarah. Elijah snatched up his knife, eyes scanning the darkness for threats. "Get to the water," he commanded Sarah, voice barely audible above the river. "If shooting starts, submerge yourself. The current will carry you downstream." Before she could protest, two figures burst from the upstream shadows. Wolf Eyes stumbling backward, blood visible on his shoulder, pursued by a man in dark clothing with a rifle. Joshua fired immediately, the shot going wide as the attacker ducked behind a boulder. "Two more behind me!" Wolf Eyes called in Cherokee, which Elijah rapidly translated. "We're surrounded," Joshua concluded grimly. "They must have followed us into the canyon somehow." Sarah's mind raced. How had Hollister's men found them? Had Stan's Tall's diversion failed? Had they been betrayed? Questions without answers as danger closed around them. "The map," she said suddenly, reaching for her pack. "If they catch us, they can't find it." Elijah understood immediately. The river would carry it away, beyond recovery. Exactly. Sarah withdrew the leather pouch containing Holloway's journal and the map, but we need a distraction to reach deeper water. Before anyone could respond, a voice called from the darkness. "Sarah Mitchell, we know you're there. Surrender now and the others can live." The voice belonged to Major Richard Hollister himself. Sarah would never forget that cultured, emotionless tone, the same voice that had ordered the deaths of her husband and friends. "He's lying," Joshua whispered. "He can't leave witnesses." "I know," Sarah replied, her initial fear hardening into resolve. "But he doesn't know that I recognize his voice. That might give us an advantage." A desperate plan formed in her mind, reckless, potentially fatal, but offering a slim chance where none had existed before. She quickly explained her idea to the others. Joshua immediately objected, while Elijah's expression grew troubled. "It's too dangerous," the former soldier insisted. "Every option is dangerous now," Sarah countered. "At least this one offers some hope." Wolf Eyes, who had joined them during this hurried conference, blood seeping through the hand pressed to his shoulder, spoke up unexpectedly. "She has warrior's heart," he said simply. "Let her choose her battle." After a moment of tense silence, Elijah nodded reluctantly. "We'll follow your lead." Sarah took a deep breath and called out, "Who's there? What do you want?" "Just to talk, Mrs. Mitchell," Hollister replied, his voice deceptively reasonable. "About what you witnessed and what you carried away from the wagon train." "I'll speak only to whoever's in charge," Sarah responded, moving slowly toward the water's edge as she spoke. "Are you the leader?" A pause, then, "I am Major Richard Hollister, Special Investigator for the War Department. You're in considerable danger, Mrs. Mitchell, both from local hostiles and from the misinformation you may have been fed by your current companions." Sarah laughed, the sound brittle even to her own ears. "Misinformation? Is that what you call the massacre of 14 innocent people? Is that what you call shooting an unarmed woman and children?" "A terrible tragedy," Hollister agreed smoothly, "but one perpetrated by hostile Indians, not government agents. Whatever you think you saw—" "I know exactly what I saw, Major Hollister," Sarah interrupted, continuing her careful movement toward deeper water. "I saw your face as you executed Samuel Holloway. I heard your voice ordering your men to leave no witnesses. I watched you murder the Cooper children." Another pause. Longer. This time, when Hollister spoke again, the false civility had vanished from his tone. "Then you understand your situation perfectly, Mrs. Mitchell. There's nowhere for you to run, no one who can protect you from what must happen now." "You're wrong," Sarah replied, reaching the river's edge. "I'm not running anymore." She locked eyes with Elijah, who nodded once before melting into the shadows with wolf eyes. Joshua positioned himself behind a large boulder, rifle ready. "I'm coming out," Sarah called, "alone and unarmed. I want to see the man brave enough to kill women and children." Without waiting for a response, she stepped into the open, deliberately visible against the pale gravel of the riverbank. In one hand, she held the leather pouch containing the map and journal. Her other hand remained empty, raised to show she carried no weapon. From the shadows upstream emerged Major Hollister, tall and commanding in his dark coat, rifle held casually but ready. The scar across his face appeared bone-white in the faint moonlight, a stark line across otherwise handsome features. Behind him, two more armed men moved into position, weapons trained on Sarah. "A foolish decision, Mrs. Mitchell," Hollister observed coldly. "Brave, perhaps, but ultimately futile. Like the courage of those children you murdered," Sarah asked, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her. "Or my husband, who offered you everything we owned if you would spare the others?" Something flickered in Hollister's cold blue eyes. Not remorse, but perhaps annoyance at being reminded of details a professional would prefer to forget. Regrettable necessities in service to a greater purpose. What purpose justifies such butchery? Sarah demanded, taking another step backward, feeling the river current strengthen around her ankles. "National security," Hollister replied simply. "The same justification that will cover your unfortunate demise." He gestured toward the pouch in her hand. "That's what I've come for. Hand it over, and perhaps your death can be quicker than your companions." Sarah clutched the pouch tighter. "You mean the evidence of your crimes? The proof that you and your War Department masters plan to violate Cherokee treaties for gold?" Hollister's expression hardened. "Careful, Mrs. Mitchell. You're speaking of matters far beyond your understanding." "I understand murder," Sarah replied, taking another step deeper into the river. "I understand corruption. I understand that powerful men think they can erase their crimes by eliminating witnesses." She was waist-deep now, the powerful current tugging at her body. Hollister's eyes narrowed as he recognized her intent. "Don't be foolish," he warned, advancing toward the riverbank. "That current will kill you before you get 10 yards. The documents will be destroyed. Better destroyed than used to steal more land, break more treaties, kill more innocent people." Sarah continued, backing into deeper water. "You've already failed, Major. Copies of Holloway's evidence reached Fort Gibson 2 days ago. Colonel Davis knows everything." It was a desperate bluff, but delivered with such conviction that doubt flickered across Hollister's face. That momentary hesitation was all the opening Elijah and Wolf eyes needed. From concealed positions upstream, they loosed arrows simultaneously. One striking the man to Hollister's right in the chest, the other embedding in the left shoulder of the second gunman. Chaos erupted. Joshua fired from his position, forcing Hollister to dive for cover. Sarah used the distraction to plunge fully into the river, still clutching the pouch as the current seized her, pulling her downstream with frightening speed. The freezing water stole her breath. The roar of the river filled her ears, and darkness closed around her as the current dragged her deeper. For a terrifying moment, she was certain she had miscalculated, that the river would claim her life as Hollister had predicted. Then, strong hands gripped her arm, pulling her toward the surface. Elijah, having anticipated her path downstream, had positioned himself to intercept her. Together, they fought the current toward a small eddy where the river's force lessened enough to permit them to reach the opposite bank. Gasping and shivering, Sarah crawled onto the gravel, still clutching the precious pouch. Gunfire continued from upstream, the sounds echoing confusingly through the canyon. "Joshua," she managed through chattering teeth. "Creating cover," Elijah explained tersely. "He'll join us downstream if he can." He helped her to her feet. "We need to move. Hollister won't give up easily." "Wolf eyes?" Sarah asked as they began making their way along the treacherous bank. "Wounded but alive," Elijah replied. "He knows rendezvous points if we're separated." As they struggled through the darkness, Sarah replayed the confrontation in her mind. She had looked into the face of the man who had destroyed her world, had spoken truth to him directly, had denied him what he sought most. It wasn't justice, not yet. But it was something, a declaration that his crimes would not remain hidden, that survivors would speak, that truth would emerge no matter how deeply buried. Behind them, the sounds of conflict faded, swallowed by the river's eternal thunder. Ahead, lay uncertainty, the continuing journey to Fort Gibson, the challenge of convincing Colonel Davis without the original documents, the ongoing threat from Hollister and his men. But in that moment, drenched and exhausted, Sarah felt an unexpected sense of triumph. She had faced her nightmare directly and emerged still fighting. Whatever came next, she would meet it not as a victim, but as a woman who had found her voice and her courage in the shadow of unimaginable loss. Fort Gibson rose from the eastern plains like a testament to the uneasy coexistence between two worlds. Its wooden palisades and whitewashed buildings represented federal authority in a territory where such authority remained contested and uncertain. To some, the fort stood as protection. To others, as a symbol of broken promises and encroaching settlement. Sarah viewed it with mingled hope and apprehension as she and Elijah approached from the western hills 3 days after their confrontation with Hollister. Their journey since that harrowing night had been a desperate affair, traveling only in darkness, avoiding trails, subsisting on whatever Elijah could forage. The leather pouch containing Holloway's map and journal, though water-damaged, remained secure at Sarah's side, its contents potentially still legible enough to serve as evidence. Joshua and Wolf Eyes had not rejoined them. Whether they had escaped, Hollister's men, been captured or worse, remained painfully unknown. The uncertainty of their fate added another layer of burden to Sarah's already heavy heart. "What if they don't believe me?" she asked, as they paused at the edge of the forest, the fort visible across open grassland. "What if Hollister has allies inside?" "Both possibilities exist," Elijah acknowledged, "but Colonel Davis's reputation suggests a man who values truth over political expediency, and Joshua spoke of him as honorable. You're not coming with me, are you?" Sarah realized, noting how Elijah's gaze remained fixed on the tree line rather than the fort ahead. "I cannot," he confirmed. "A Cherokee man accompanying a white woman to a military fort would create complications, questions that might distract from your testimony." He turned to face her fully. "This final part of the journey you must make alone." Though she had anticipated this moment, the reality of it struck harder than expected. After everything they had endured together, separating now felt like losing a crucial part of herself. Yet she understood the necessity. Her testimony would face enough challenges without adding the prejudices many soldiers held toward indigenous people. "Will I see you again?" she asked, the question escaping before she could consider its implications. Something flickered in Elijah's dark eyes, an emotion quickly contained, but not before Sarah caught its essence. "That depends on many things," he replied carefully. "What justice looks like, what you choose after justice is done, where your path leads." "And where your path leads," she added softly. He nodded, acknowledging the unspoken complexity between them. In another time, another place, perhaps the connection that had formed during their journey might have grown into something named and honored. But reality pressed upon them, a military fort waiting, a wounded society where relationships like theirs invited dangerous attention, and the unfinished business of justice for the dead. "Thank you," Sarah said finally, the simple words wholly inadequate for all she wished to express. "For finding me in that cave, for believing me, for everything after." Elijah reached out, his fingers lightly touching the colorful bracelet the Cherokee child had given her, which still circled Sarah's wrist, despite everything they had endured. "When this is over, if you wish to return to White Pine Haven, follow Thunder River to its source. I will leave signs you can follow." It wasn't a promise exactly, but it offered possibility. A future beyond the immediate quest for justice that had consumed them both. Sarah nodded, understanding that some things required resolution before others could begin. Their parting was brief, practical, a necessity rather than a choice. Sarah watched as Elijah melted back into the forest with the same silent grace that had first brought him to her cave sanctuary. Then, squaring her shoulders, she turned toward Fort Gibson and began walking across the open plain, alone but carrying the strength their journey had forged within her. The fort's sentries spotted her immediately. 2 mounted soldiers rode out to intercept her, rifles ready but not aimed directly at her, standard caution rather than overt threat. "Identify yourself," the lead rider called as they approached. "My name is Sarah Mitchell," she replied, raising her empty hands to show she carried no weapons. "I need to speak with Colonel Davis urgently. I have evidence of a massacre and government corruption." The soldiers exchanged glances, clearly unprepared for such a declaration from a solitary woman emerging from the wilderness. After a brief, whispered consultation, the lead rider dismounted. "Ma'am, you look like you've been through hell," he observed, his tone softening as he noted her exhausted state and tattered clothing. "Are you injured?" "No," Sarah replied. "But I have traveled far with information Colonel Davis needs to hear. Lives depend on it." Something in her voice, the absolute conviction, perhaps, or the edge of steel that hardship had forged into her character, convinced the soldier. He helped her mount his horse, then led her toward the fort on foot, his companion riding ahead to alert the command. As they passed through the gates, Sarah felt the weight of curious stares. Fort Gibson housed not only soldiers, but also their families, civilian workers, and various officials involved in the complex administration of territorial affairs. To these observers, she must have presented a strange sight. A woman in trail-worn clothing streaked with mud, emerging alone from the wilderness with claims of massacre and corruption. She was escorted directly to headquarters, a modest building at the fort's center. Inside, rather than the immediate audience with Colonel Davis she had hoped for, she found herself facing his adjutant, a young lieutenant named Parker who regarded her with skeptical courtesy. "Mrs. Mitchell," he began after she had been seated, and offered water, "your claims are extremely serious. The colonel is currently engaged in important business, but will see you as soon as possible. In the meantime, perhaps you could provide me with some details." Sarah studied the lieutenant carefully, attempting to determine whether he represented help or hindrance. His well-ordered desk, the precise arrangement of his uniform, and the carefully neutral expression he maintained offered few clues to his character. 2 weeks ago," she began, "a wagon train was massacred at Copper Creek Pass. 14 people were killed, including my husband. The attackers claimed to be government surveyors, but were actually military agents under the command of Major Richard Hollister, seeking a map of Windfall Pass that our wagon master carried." "Windfall Pass?" Lieutenant Parker interrupted, his composure slipping momentarily. "Are you certain that was the name?" Sarah nodded, noting his reaction with interest. "The map shows a secret route through Cherokee territory, valuable both militarily and for accessing gold deposits on protected land. Major Hollister killed everyone to prevent evidence of this conspiracy from reaching Colonel Davis." "These are extraordinary allegations," Parker said, his formal manner returning. "Do you have any proof beyond your word?" In response, Sarah placed the water-damaged leather pouch on his desk. "The Journal of Samuel Holloway, our wagon master, documenting the conspiracy, and the map itself." Before the lieutenant could respond, the office door opened to admit a tall, imposing figure whose weathered face and penetrating gaze suggested a man accustomed to command. Though his uniform bore the insignia of a colonel, it was the intelligence in his eyes, rather than his rank, that immediately commanded respect. "Colonel Davis," Lieutenant Parker acknowledged, rising quickly. "I was informed we have a visitor with urgent information," the colonel replied, his gaze fixed assessingly on Sarah. "Mrs. Mitchell, I presume?" Sarah stood, meeting his gaze directly. "Yes, sir. She claims to have survived a massacre at Copper Creek Pass," Parker explained, "and alleges that Major Hollister was responsible." Hollister. Colonel Davis's expression sharpened. The same Hollister currently waiting in my quarters, having arrived yesterday with reports of hostile Cherokee attacking settlers. Sarah's heart nearly stopped. He's here? In the fort? With 2 men, Davis confirmed, studying her reaction closely. He's pursuing what he describes as deserters and thieves, including a woman matching your description. The moment balanced. On a knife's edge, everything: justice for the dead, her own survival, the protection of Cherokee lands, depended on which account Colonel Davis chose to believe, hers or Hollister's. "Colonel," she said with quiet intensity, "I watched Major Hollister execute 14 innocent people, including children. I hid beneath my husband's body to survive. I spent 19 days alone in a mountain cave before being found by a Cherokee. Scout, every step since then has been toward bringing the truth to you." She gestured toward the pouch on Parker's desk. "That contains Samuel Holloway's journal, documenting a conspiracy to exploit Windfall Pass for gold, violating treaties with the Cherokee. It also contains the map Hollister was willing to commit mass murder to obtain." Davis's expression remained unreadable as he took the pouch and examined its water-damaged contents. After several tense moments, he looked up, decision evident in his posture. "Lieutenant, summon Captain Reynolds and his men. Have them place Major Hollister and his companions under guard until this matter can be fully investigated." His tone brooked no argument. "And send for Dr. Collins to attend to Mrs. Mitchell." Relief washed through Sarah so powerfully she nearly collapsed. The colonel guided her back to her seat with unexpected gentleness. "Your journey is over, Mrs. Mitchell," he said quietly. "You're safe now." Safety. The concept seemed almost foreign after weeks of constant danger and vigilance. "What about my companions?" she asked. "Joshua Blackwood and a Cherokee hunter named Wolf Eyes. They were separated from us during Hollister's attack." "Blackwood arrived yesterday," Davis informed her, "wounded but alive. He corroborated parts of your story before we knew you had survived. The Cherokee man you mentioned was treated by our surgeon and left this morning, declining to remain in the fort. Both alive." The knowledge released the final knot of tension Sarah had carried. Whatever happened now, the investigation, Hollister's eventual court-martial, the protection of Windfall Pass, she had fulfilled her promise to bear witness, to ensure the massacre at Copper Creek would not remain hidden or unpunished. 3 weeks later, Sarah stood on the porch of a small cabin at the fort's edge, watching thunderclouds gather over the distant mountains. Colonel Davis had provided the temporary quarters while the investigation proceeded, allowing her to recover her strength and provide formal testimony. Hollister remained under guard, his arrogance gradually crumbling as evidence mounted against him. 2 of his men, facing hanging for their part in the massacre, had turned on their commander, revealing connections to powerful figures in Washington who had orchestrated the Windfall Pass scheme. Letters had been dispatched to the War Department and Territorial Governor, ensuring the conspiracy would face scrutiny at the highest levels. Joshua had recovered from his wounds and departed the previous week, returning to White Pine Haven with news of their success and safer passage through the mountains now that Hollister's men no longer hunted them. Sarah's testimony was complete. Justice, slow but methodical, had begun its work. The dead of Copper Creek would be properly remembered, their murders acknowledged and condemned rather than disguised as another Indian attack. Yet as she stared toward the mountains, Sarah recognized that completing her mission had left her at a crossroads. The life she had planned with Andrew in Oregon Territory no longer existed. Returning to her family in Virginia held little appeal. They were strangers to the woman she had become. She could stay near Fort Gibson, perhaps, where Colonel Davis had offered her a position, teaching the children of officers and civilian staff. Or she could follow Thunder River to its source, seeking the signs Elijah had promised to leave as rain. began to fall. Gentle but persistent, Sarah made her decision. Justice had been her purpose, but it need not define her future. The woman who had survived a massacre, who had hidden in a mountain cave, who had faced down Hollister and won, that woman deserved to choose her own path forward. Tomorrow, she would leave Fort Gibson, heading west rather than east. Whether Elijah would be waiting, whether White Pine Haven would become her home, whether the connection they had formed would grow into something deeper, these questions remained unanswered. But Sarah Mitchell, no longer defined solely by loss and survival, found herself welcoming the uncertainty. The mountains had nearly claimed her life, then sheltered her, challenged her, and ultimately helped forge her into someone stronger than she had believed possible. It seemed fitting that her new beginning would lead her back to them, not as a desperate fugitive hiding in a cave, but as a woman who had found her courage in the shadow of tragedy and emerged against all odds, ready to embrace whatever awaited her beyond the next ridge. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.